Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing signs your breakup is temporary. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing signs your breakup is temporary. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you will want to know if you can get them back into a relationship. Although nothing can be guaranteed, there are certain situations which suggest you will reconnect. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 signs your breakup is temporary. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is your ex hasn't collected important possessions. So at the time of a breakup, your ex-dumper would have ended things and then likely moved forward with their life. And when I say that, they're likely to have walked out of the door if they was with you in person. If it was via text, they would have said, look, I'm not going to discuss this anymore, it's over, or something to that effect. And a telephone call would have been similar. In essence, your ex-dumper has moved from this point of where they were with you to where they're no longer with you. And what this can sometimes create is a situation where wherever you are living, you have some of your ex's possessions in and around your space. Maybe this was a house that you shared and your ex has moved out. Maybe you lived in different houses and you just had some of their possessions because, of course, you visited each other and you saw each other and you left things at each other's house. Now, when we look at this situation, what we often see is that a dumper is going to be requesting important possessions ASAP. Now, they might be leaving a few days in between. They might even leave a week. Let's just say they leave it 2 or 3 weeks. But in my opinion, if you still have some of your ex's important possessions more than a month after the breakup, I would suggest that this could be a sign that your breakup is temporary. Now, of course, like I said in the intro, there is nothing that can be guaranteed in this world. I'm not saying for definite that if you still have some of your ex's possessions which are deemed important after a month, that you would definitely get back together. But certainly, this is a positive sign if you want to reconnect. And the reason I say this is because from the years of research that I've done, people who tend to end relationships and move on with their life, moving forward in a way where they never come back and reconnect, are often the quickest to want to make sure that everything is organised, that everything is put in place where they have their possessions back, you have your possessions back, and there is no reason to contact one another in the future. So from what I have seen, dumpers who generally don't come back, unfortunately, are the ones who tend to sort things out very quickly. Now, like I said, when I say very quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean that very day or a few days afterwards. Although sometimes you do see dumpers, when you think back in hindsight, you think, yeah, my ex was actually taking some of their possessions back in the weeks prior to the breakup. You might actually see and notice a situation where your ex was almost planning this in a way. Now, if you did or if you didn't, this is irrespective right now, because what we're talking about is whether or not they're leaving important possessions, things that they literally need. We're not talking about a cheap pair of socks. There isn't a guarantee your ex is going to ever want to come back into your life and ask for those socks back if they're not particularly important, expensive, or sentimental. So we are talking about specific, important things in your ex's mind. Yes, it could be expensive. Yes, it could be necessary maybe for work, or it could be sentimental. But if you have some of these belongings from your ex, they're in your possession, you know they want them, you know they will miss them. If they haven't contacted you within a month or so for those, there could be an argument made that this is because in your ex's mind, they just wanted some time out. They wanted a break rather than a breakup. even if they didn't actually say those words, what we can deduct from this is that your ex-bedumper is certainly at some stage going to reach out to you, going to ask for these things back, but maybe in the back of their mind, subconscious or maybe consciously, they're thinking, well, there's no need for me to take these things right now because I'm going to appear again in 6 to 8 weeks' time, try and reconnect with my dumpee, and then it doesn't matter if my things are still at their house. If something like that is going on in your dumper's mind, they are less likely to want to try and sort everything out ASAP. As I keep saying, it doesn't necessarily mean this will be a few days afterwards. ASAP could mean a couple of weeks. Most dumpers will want the dust to settle. So we have to understand that I'm talking about maybe a month and beyond. If there is something that your ex really would miss or want or need, then they are likely to come back in the future. And you have to ask yourself, why they left it this long? Is it because they was thinking to themselves, look, this is going to get resolved in a few weeks, so there's no need for me to take everything away from my dumpee? Now, of course, the caveats to this is if your ex desperately needs something instantly. Maybe, for example, they want their work laptop that they've left at your house. They need it for 2 days' time. They, of course, are going to be asking for that certainly a lot sooner than a month because they need it for what they are doing at work. But if this is something which they don't actually need this second, but they will in the future, maybe it's sentimental, maybe it's expensive. If your ex is thinking that they may want to reconnect with you, then they're not necessarily going to be rushing to sort everything out, moving their things from your house to theirs, etc., because they're believing that hopefully in the near future, in the short to medium term, things can be sorted out, and that could be a sign that your breakup is temporary. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is your ex is reaching out regularly. So when we're asking the question, what are the signs your breakup is temporary? One of the biggest signs to look out for is that your ex is reaching out regularly. Now, when I say regularly, this is something which we have to understand is going to be different for different people, but let's use our common sense on this. When I say regularly, I'm not talking about once every 9 months, okay? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be once every day. It could be once every 3 or 4 weeks. That could be deemed regular for a dumper. Because somebody who has ended a relationship and doesn't want to reconnect with their ex is not going to be reaching out to their dumpee. And we're not talking about necessary contact. We're not talking about that example I gave earlier where your ex-bedumper might reach out to you and say, hey, you've got my work laptop. I could really do with it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about unnecessary contact. And if your ex-bedumper is reaching out to you on a regular basis, doesn't have to be every day or even every week, but every 3 or 4 weeks or so, okay, that kind of range would absolutely count as regularly. If they're doing that for unnecessary reasons, we can say that this is a sign that your breakup might be temporary because your ex-bedumper is clearly thinking about you. And if they're thinking about you, they are going to move within to missing you. Somebody does not send a text, make a call, or knock on somebody's door if they're not thinking of that person. We don't do anything for no reason. Everything we do is for a reason. So we're either doing it for a necessary reason because we need something, even though we don't want to be in a connection with that person, or we're reaching out to them for an unnecessary reason, but because we're thinking about them, we care about them, we miss them. This could be subconscious, doesn't have to be a conscious thought, but actions speak louder than words. If your ex-bedumper is reaching out to you on a regular basis, this has to mean they're thinking of you. Why would they be doing it? And this is why it is a really good sign that your breakup could be temporary. Now, there is no guarantees in this world. When we're trying to get an ex back, there is no paint-by-numbers advice that would definitely get you to that promised land. Nothing works 100% of the time, and nothing fails 100% of the time. But if you want advice and support to try and increase the chance of you getting your ex back based on the years of experience that I have from my research on my coaching course, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Now, if your ex is reaching out regularly, And you might be wondering to yourself, well, why haven't we got back together yet? What's the point of them reaching out regularly? Why is this a sign that they might want to get back with me if they're reaching out but nothing's taking place? Well, this depends somewhat on them and also you. I like to give advice to dumpees on how to proceed if they receive contact from their ex, just as I like to give advice to dumpers about how to proceed if they've changed their mind. This makes a big difference. Your ex per dumper might be reaching out to you regularly, but they might not realise that you're interested in reconnecting. Just because somebody ends a relationship, it doesn't mean that they're a confident person. It doesn't mean that they're somebody who feels like they can say exactly how they feel. In fact, most dumpers are actually feeling not just shy, but also nervous about reaching out. They recognise the pain. They recognise the problems they've caused you and them and everybody else that may be mixed up in between. Your ex-per dumper is unlikely to be feeling particularly confident in how they approach this scenario. Of course, some might, but I would say the majority don't. So you might be receiving this constant contact and you might be thinking, well, why aren't we getting back together? But it could depend on how you're reacting to that contact. How are you behaving? If your ex-per dumper reaches out to you and says, hi, how are you? That's unnecessary. And you respond and put, I'm good, thanks. They might be thinking, well, that is a response, but it is kind of a statement. They haven't really asked a question, so I don't really know what that means. So I'm just going to leave it here for a while. And maybe I'll reach out again in a few weeks or months, or maybe I won't. I have to tell you, I've spoke to lots of dumpers who have told me that they would only reach out once to a dumpee. And if they didn't get a response that they felt was inviting them to continue talking, then they perhaps would just back off further and never reach out again. Which is why, as a dumpee, I always suggest if you receive contact from your ex, respond and ask a question back. Don't just put a statement. Don't just put, I'm okay. Put, I'm okay. How have you been? Something as simplistic as that can grow the conversation. Now, I'm not suggesting that you bring up the breakup. I'm not suggesting you bring up relationships or dating. In fact, I'm actively telling you not to do that, okay? Don't bring up those three things. However, you should be asking a question back. This is about growing the connection. And you're moving into the communication stage with the aim of eventually moving into the meeting stage and then hopefully reconnecting. Now, how you navigate this is something you may want to speak about with me via audio coaching because your circumstances will be unique. But by and large, the generalised advice I would give is if you receive contact from your ex, which is regular, then this is a good sign. It's a sign that your breakup could be temporary because they're clearly missing you and they're clearly wanting a conversation. Now, whether this is just going to be something platonic, whether it could be more, well, we don't know exactly yet. And it's down to you and to them to navigate this communication stage effectively and see where it leads. But ultimately, contact from your ex is always a sign that they're thinking of you and could be a sign that your breakup is temporary. So now let's get into point number 3 and my final point of today's podcast about signs your breakup is temporary. And point number 3 is the breakup is due to a temporary circumstance. So when I say this, we're talking about an instance where you and your partner either broke up amicably or maybe one person took the lead and therefore you are the dumpee because your now ex-per dumper decided to say, look, this isn't going to work and we need to end this, but it's due to a circumstance. Now, the example I'm going to give today is maybe one or both of you are going travelling, okay? It doesn't have to be this. You can consider how your situation may fit in, but for this example, we're speaking about travelling. So imagine that you and your ex were together, you were very, very happy, but one of you wanted to travel. Maybe your dumper wanted to go around the world for 6 months, and you didn't. So you decide to stay at home, and they decide to go and follow their dreams and go around the world for 6 months. Now, just before they leave, they say to you, look, I'm sorry, I don't think we can keep this going. We're going to have to break up. We've got to end this because this is not going to work with me being around the world and you being back here. Either maybe they're feeling jealous or maybe you're feeling jealous. Whatever the situation is, this is where a relationship could end due to circumstance. Now, I would suggest that if a circumstance does bring you back together within a somewhat reasonable time frame, such as 6 months or so, I would suggest this is a sign your breakup could be temporary. When we look at the scenario that I've described and how yours could possibly fit in, the time apart is around 6 months. It's not ideal, it's not great, but also it's not 3 years. If your ex said, I want to travel around the world for 3 years, then maybe by the time they come back, you're both in different positions within your life. However, if it's around 6 months, then the situation when your ex comes back could be somewhat similar. You might be in a somewhat similar position. You might not have dated anybody else. It's very difficult to find a long-term compatible partner within that time frame, so you will likely be single, and they've just been around the world. It's very unlikely that they've met anybody new, certainly unlikely that they've established a new long-term relationship. They're likely to come back and feel almost like that they're back in time. They returned, and everybody else has carried on their lives within the town or city that you live in, and they might be feeling like, okay, I just want to go back to the situation that I was once in, which was the relationship with you. Now, you as a dumpee, you might not feel the same. You might feel like, well, look, you ended this, you've gone away, I don't want to reconnect. However, whether or not you felt that at the time, you might have evolved your thoughts now to a place where you're happy to reconnect. Now, as I keep saying, this doesn't have to be connected to somebody going travelling. But the example I've given is something that you can connect with different circumstances. If there is a temporary circumstance, maybe up to 6 months or so, where you've got to be apart, this is where a breakup may occur, but I would suggest is a sign your breakup is probably only temporary. Because if and when both of you come back into that place, the same situation you were once in, these feelings and emotions are likely to bubble to the surface once more, and a reconnection could take place. Maybe you didn't even lose contact during your time apart. You were broken up with officially, but during the time apart, you still spoke. I don't know, of course, exactly what's gone on with you, but you will be able to understand how this may be. Maybe the situation wasn't about travel, maybe it was about education, maybe it was about work. You can see the examples. Could be plenty of other opportunities as well. But when people are asking me signs that your breakup is temporary, I always suggest you look at the circumstance. And if the circumstance is you having to be apart from your partner for a certain amount of time, maybe around 6 months or so, I think this could be something that you reconnect with when you're back in the same place. It doesn't always happen, but generally speaking, neither of you would have moved on, neither of you would have found a new long-term compatible partner, and when you are back in the same area, those emotions will come back to the surface and you will likely reconnect. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.